Here's another episode of my great movie series, and this time we're going to take a look at one of the greatest film spectacles ever made. Whatever you like, whether it's superhero movies, whether it's science fiction operas like Star Wars, this movie is the great granddaddy of them. It's the 1927 silent movie Metropolis by Fritz Lang. Coming up next. Right, I'm telling you, you have to see Metropolis if you want to call yourself a movie history buff, a film buff. A lot of people like to call themselves cinephiles, but then you ask them, okay, what's your favorite silent movie? What's your favorite very old movie? And a lot of them can't actually name many silent movies. If you're going to start with silent movies, Metropolis is a good place to go. For one, it feels very fresh and interesting. It's the story of a science fictional city, presumably set in the future. It has the very familiar trope, I think derived from H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, where the people on top of the world living in high skyscraper-like buildings are elites. And there are people in a below-ground city helping to run the city. They run the machines that make the city go. They are the working class. And the working class is pathetic and overworked, while the people who live at the top of society live a nice high life. And I'm punning on the word high. The top of society is a place called the New Tower of Babel, and there's sort of a Garden of Edens at the top of this world. While below there's this gritty machine-like space where people are working with clocks, working against the clock. And so you have this idea of the elites versus the masses in this movie. What keeps the workers in this world revolting against their masters above them? Well, it's some form of weird religious faith in which a preacher woman tells them to hope for a mediator and to appreciate their heart. So you see scenes of this cult-like religious service where the workers go, presumably after they've been working for 10 to 15 hours a day, nearly killing themselves, and then they go and worship and feel better about their lives. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so. Click the red button at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. This movie has a ton of social, political, and economic commentary, as you can tell. And so in this movie, one of the elites, the son of the elite man in the system, descends into the underworld and finally sees what's going on with these workers. And he becomes very upset by this and goes to his father and says, do you know what's going on in the underworld? At the same time, the father, given the science fictional name Jo Fredersen, has this wild inventor who's invented a robot. This inventor is going to use the robot to help quell or stop the working classes from revolting, because there are hints there are going to be revolts in this machine city below ground. So that gives you the plot, basically. Now, the movie is directed by one of the great directors ever, I think, Fritz Lang. He's a German. He's part of the movement called German Expressionism. If you like wild angles, inventive montages, this is your thing. I think Metropolis comes out of the world of opera and theater in the late 19th, early 20th century. And so this is a swooning melodrama, as well as a parable and metaphor. If you try to think about this movie realistically, it makes zero sense. I mean, the plausibility for this world existing is nearly zero. But clearly the movie is a metaphor for the early 20th century, where you have elites who are bankers and who are leisure class sorts of people versus the huge masses of working class people. And the movie strives to ask questions about how all of society can be united together, because it shows clearly in the beginning and the middle of the movie a division between these two cities, and the one city oppressing and overworking the other half. There's this line in the movie which is pretty common, which is that the head and the hands need to be united. The head representing the elites, the hands representing the machine workers. What's going to unite the head and hands? Well, it's the heart. And so here's the metaphor of the body politic. That is the entire city, the entire society uniting as part of a body. And the movie is going to ask questions, can a whole society, can a whole city that's divided by social classes, by economic classes, ever be united? The movie's going to try to do political work then. Probably whatever you think of capitalism or socialism or Marxism, the movie's probably going to affirm your position by the end of the movie. I think you can watch this movie therefore in several different ways and come to the same conclusions that you already had. But what makes this movie really special, I think, even though it's pretty ridiculous as a melodramatic science fiction opera, is the spectacle and the scenes that you'll encounter. I mean, this movie has one of the first bad robots ever used in movies. And the robot is played by a wonderful actress. In fact, it's an unforgettable performance, Brigitte Helm. And her face is just totally memorable. In fact, I find these silent movies, the silent movie era of the 1920s, to have some of the best faces ever in movies. It really plays two characters, the bad robot and the preacher woman. Two halves of society, in other words, the theological and the technological. This movie has very clear messages about technology versus religion and theology. One other fascinating thing about this movie is that for a number of decades, the movie was actually lost. Well, that is, half an hour of it was lost. There was a 2-hour version that was preserved, and that was what most people saw up until 2008. But then almost the entire movie was found in Buenos Aires in 2008, and people have restored this movie back to its original length, which was 2.5 hours. So I think it's best for you to try to watch the 148-minute version of this, which adds the restored scenes and really helps with the pacing of this movie. And you need to turn it on with the original full orchestral score that was composed for it back in 1927, because the music in it will be familiar to those of you who like John Williams, for example. And it's coming straight out of the classical musical world of the early 1920s. So my advice is to watch the 148-minute version of this with the orchestral score, because anything else is going to be a lesser version of the movie. And if you haven't ever watched this movie and you want to call yourself a movie lover, well, you need to earn your Metropolis badge. So go watch this movie. What did you think of it? What are your questions about it? Please leave me a comment in the comment section.